my name's Michelle Howes, and I'm a volunteer tour guide at Painshill Park. You couldn't go there today in real life because it's been closed because of the winds, so you're lucky that you'll get to see it on the screen.
Okay, and Colette? Colette's our BSL interpreter.
Right, so welcome to Painshill Park, a beautiful landscape garden in Cobham. The strapline, "Where the walk is a work of art," was chosen with good reason, as this is exactly how it was designed. To open up a series of vistas across the landscape as you walk around. Living paintings, some framed by trees, others by arches. A surprise around each corner. Charles Hamilton created this garden over 35 years, between 1738 and 1773. And although it fell into complete disrepair and ruin, it has been restored over the past 40 years to mirror his vision of the perfect English landscape garden. Painshill's name probably originated from medieval landowner Richard Pain in the early 13th century. In the early 16th century, the Bishop of Winchester acquired the land to extend his deer park, then bequeathed it to Corpus Christi College at Oxford, which he founded in 1515. Henry VIII acquired Painshill in 1536, and it became part of his deer park, the Chase stretching from Hampton Court to Wisley. Following Henry's death, it was sold as farmland and woodland to 3 families, then to the Marquis de Quen, who was subsequently ruined in the collapse of the South Sea Company in 1720, and finally William Bellamy, a wealthy barrister. On his death, Painshill was acquired by Hamilton, by which time it was a mixture of farmland, forestry, and unproductive heathland. Hamilton went to great lengths and considerable difficulty to transform the estate into his landscape garden, creating what Horace Walpole called a fine place out of a cursed hill. Hamilton was a keen plantsman and an original and imaginative garden designer, creating a garden that was ahead of contemporary fashion and practice. Visitors flocked to see it, being shown around by the head gardener, with pony chaise from the inn at Cobham being used for those who preferred to be driven around. In its prime, Painshill Park was world famous, influencing gardens in Europe, Russia, and America, and receiving important visitors, both royalty and statesmen. John Adams, second American president, wrote in his diary, "Painshill is the most striking piece of art that I have yet seen." Hamilton was born in 1704 into Irish aristocracy, but being the 14th child and the 9th son of the Earl of Abercorn, he was not wealthy and he had to work for a living. Although he was MP for Strabane in Ireland for 33 years, he spent most of his life in England. At Westminster School, he studied Latin and Greek and met fellow pupils who would later become lifelong friends, including Henry Hoare, the banker who created Stour Head. Studying at Oxford, he met Henry Fox, another close friend to whom Hamilton gave garden advice. Once he had graduated, Hamilton set off on the first of his 2 grand tours across Europe, which fostered his taste for the fine arts and acquainted him with great works of antiquity and the Renaissance. It gave him many ideas he later developed at Painshill. Vineyards, alpine valleys, Palladian architecture, and classical Roman ruins all inspired him, and he brought back statues, ornaments and sculptures, some of which were later displayed within Painshill Park. After various work posts and time spent around court, he went on another grand tour with Henry Fox in 1732, after which Fox lent him the money to acquire the land at Painshill. In 1738, Hamilton moved into Painshill and took up the office of Clerk Controller in Prince Frederick's household for 8 years, later being appointed Receiver General of the King's Minorcan Revenue for 14 years, all the while transforming Painshill into his very own pleasure garden, inspired by scenes and vistas he had experienced on his grand tours. Hamilton studied and collected art and was particularly fond of Claude Lorraine and Salvator Rosa's paintings. Claudian landscapes feature delicate trees framing a distant horizon, the sky a golden glow, stretches of reflective water and eye-catching buildings, the whole landscape creating a feeling of calm and joy. Salvator Rosa, in contrast, painted wilder, more rugged scenes, with stern rocks and twisted trees beneath stormy skies. Look around Painshill and you'll see elements of both, with ornamental pleasure grounds to the east and wild and natural woodland to the west. This sketch from the time shows Hamilton's small, modest house, which he described as old-fashioned, but he never had the money to replace it. It was demolished by the next owner, and now, as then, there is no house for visitors to see. By 1764, Hamilton had married Agnes Coburn and wrote, "I find the sweets of domestic happiness with a wife who not only likes, but greatly assists me in this prudent scheme." Sadly, no children survived, and Agnes, the best of wives, died in 1772, aged just 38. The following year, Hamilton was forced to sell Painshill, years of financial difficulties and debt catching up with him. He moved to the Royal Crescent, Bath, marrying Frances Calvert in 1774 when he was 70. Later, he built Lansdowne House, which still stands today, and a much admired garden. He continued to advise on other gardens, including Bowood Gardens and Holland Park. He died in 1786 and is buried in the choir of Bath Abbey. The garden was created during the 18th century when there was a backlash against the French and their formal geometric gardens such as Versailles, and a move towards a more natural appearance to parks and gardens, albeit man-made. Capability Brown is the most famous professional garden designer from this movement, Hamilton being less well remembered, as he was a gifted amateur who advised friends and fellow garden enthusiasts without charge. In the 1730s, William Kent started experimenting with the pictorial circuit garden, presenting an ever-changing series of scenes and views, often focused on a building or another feature, but independent of a house. The best examples of this are Kent's design at Rousham, Stourhead, where Hamilton advised his friend Henry Hoare, and the iconic Five-Arch Bridge was inspired by the one at Painshill, and Hamilton's own masterpiece, Painshill. Other landscape gardens created locally at that time include Claremont, designed by William Kent, Capability Brown, and others. After Kent's death, Hamilton continued and developed his work and was described as the top man of taste in England. When Hamilton acquired Painshill, he found varied topography with hills, valleys, meadows, woodland, and heath, bounded to the north by the old Portsmouth Road, which is now the busy A3, and the River Mole meandering to the east and south. There was no lake to speak of. He created that from a small donut-shaped oxbow lake formed from an abandoned meander of the River Mole. The soil is quite acid, which influenced his planting choices. He improved the soil through ploughing, harrowing, planting turnips, then digging in manure from sheep fed on the turnips, before planting the finest grass seed with clover from Holland. The Painshill landscape and its restored plantings change constantly throughout the seasons. This calendar charts some of the delights to look out for. Hamilton transformed Painshill and created the pictorial circuit walk we enjoy today, with a series of scenes, continually changing, surprising, and mystifying, with stopping points to enjoy a view or appreciate a set scene. It was designed as a garden of changing moods to stimulate the senses and emotions. So let's take a virtual tour now and explore all the places I take my people on a real guided tour, but in half the time. We'll be following the historic route marked in yellow on this map, which takes us around the entire park, including all the follies and features. It's 2.5 miles on foot. We start with a short climb up a zigzag path through the woods, where you can enjoy snowdrops and daffodils at the moment, and bluebells will be coming soon. And we come out on top of a ridge planted with a variety of fir trees, some long established, some new ones growing to replace the old ones in time. The uninterrupted view over the Surrey countryside to the North Downs illustrates the popular 18th century idea of a borrowed landscape. Earlier formal gardens were enclosed and inward-looking, but now there was increased interest and enjoyment in looking out and in enjoying the view. Poet and garden enthusiast Alexander Pope called this calling in the country. As we walk along Fir Walk, this vineyard stretches down the hillside to the lake. Planted over 5 acres in 1740, it thrived for over 40 years, producing sparkling wine. Hamilton wrote a long account of the winemaking process, but warned that people were prejudiced, then as now, against English wine. So he found it advisable not to reveal its origin until after tasting. One French ambassador was convinced he was drinking champagne. Restoring the vineyard to half its original size in 1992, it was planted with Pinot Noir grapes, which Hamilton grew, plus modern varieties, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, and Pinot Grigio. Modern trellising is used, except on the bottom 3 rows, which use the single pole Burgundian method from the 18th century. As well as the weather, Painshill Vineyard has to contend with hungry geese and other animals eating the grapes before they're picked. Most years, the grapes are harvested by volunteers and made into sparkling wine, white and rosé, which is for sale in the Painshill shop, along with a special gin made from botanicals from around Painshill Park. Now we turn into the oval lawn of the Amphitheatre, so called because the evergreen trees and bushes surrounding it are in ever-increasing heights, evoking a tiered audience. There are few flowers here. It was all about the variety of tone, shape, and texture of the green shrubs. Some had berries to attract birds, as birdsong was much appreciated at that time. Replanting began in the 1980s using the same plants that Hamilton would have sourced. And a natural highlight here is the evergreen cork oak tree shown on the right. We know that was planted by Hamilton, and it's one of about 80 trees remaining in the park that are over 250 years old. Its bark is traditionally used for making corks, hence the name, so it seems fitting that he planted it close to the vineyard. This statue was based on the original marble one that can still be seen outside Palazzo Vecchio in Florence, created by Giambologna around 1582. It's called The Abduction of the Sabine Women, after the Roman story, which also forms the basis of the musical Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. It was created in the Mannerist style, where artists explored the idea of beauty for beauty's sake, in works that showcase their artistic talent, with figures composed of sinuous lines, graceful curves, and exaggerated poses. The composition twists like a flickering candle, inviting the viewer to circle it and view it from all sides. Hamilton saw this statue in Florence and bought a lead copy made by John Cheer of London. Unfortunately, it was vandalised, then sold for its lead content in 1952. The statue you see today was sculpted by Ivor Abrahams from bronze, patinated to look like lead. The base it stands on is original, from Hamilton's time. The amphitheatre leads to the Gothic temple. This 10-sided building was made of timber rendered to look like stone. 5 sides are panelled halfway up to direct the eye to the 5 open sides, which show carefully placed vistas framed within each arch, like living paintings. The Gothic temple was the first major building on the circuit walk and part of the great design axis running from the Sabine statue to the Gothic Tower. It's a romantic place where we now hold weddings. This was the first building to be restored by Painshill Park Trust in 1985, replicating Hamilton's building techniques, reconstructing the decorative woodwork, and replastering the fan-vaulted ceiling that you can see through the window there. The tips of each arch have a cast iron droplet, an early use of cast iron in a garden. The view from the Gothic temple, which George III said he preferred to the reciprocal one from the Turkish tent at the other end of the lake, includes many of the features we'll visit later. To the right is the Great Cedar, an original cedar of Lebanon, planted by Hamilton, and the largest multi-stemmed cedar in Europe. Dropping down to the lakeside, we come to the back of the Gothic ruined abbey. Ruined abbeys, chapels, and priories were very popular in gardens of this period, as they reminded visitors of the past, the Roman Catholic Church, and the dissolution of the monasteries. Monks were renowned for their skills in horticulture, growing grapes to make communion wine. This might be why Hamilton placed it next to his vineyard. But there's a lot more to this story. The ruined abbey wasn't one of the original features on the pictorial circuit. In fact, it was the last building built in the park in 1772. Up till then, this area was a clay meadow, which Hamilton dug out to provide clay for making bricks, tiles, and plant pots, which were filed in kilns located here. Hamilton used these bricks in his constructions, but it never took off as a commercial venture. In 1772, Hamilton needed to sell the park and wanted to make this area more attractive to achieve a better price. So he flooded the clay meadow to make this beautiful reflective lake and screened the kilns and brickworks within the ruined abbey. It was built with his own bricks and originally had longer side walls. The path from the Gothic temple meanders down to the lakeside in what John Parnell described in 1763 as a serpentine walk formed of the most rare and beautiful shrubs, English and exotic. Among them is the American collection, with the sort of plants that John Bartram sent to England in his 5 guinea boxes that we'll talk about later. These included maples producing stunning autumn colour, magnolias, especially the grandiflora, and the kalmia or calico bush with its delicate flowers. Unusual plants include the thorny toothache tree, originally used as a herbal remedy by Native Americans. The artist William Hogarth described the serpentine path as a line of beauty which leads the eye in a wanton kind of chase. Then we reach this bridge, created at the same time as the pagoda at Kew, when all things Chinese were in fashion. China being a closed country, very little was known of Chinese design, except for a few engravings and pattern books. But Hamilton did own a copy of 4 books of architecture by Italian architect Andrea Palladio. And so he built this bridge in the Palladian style, its attractive design giving promise of more wonders to come and enticing the visitor to cross the lake onto Grotto Island. The main feature of the island is to the right of this picture, the Rock Arch. It's made from oolitic limestone, a sedimentary rock formed millions of years ago and quarried near Cirencester. This rock is used all over Grotto Island to create a strange, intriguing atmosphere. While in Italy, Hamilton visited natural rock caves on the coast and man-made grottos in Renaissance gardens. They were mysterious, cool, shaded places where moving water caught and reflected any light filtering in. In mythology, grottos were home to the nymphs and portals to other worlds. Leonardo da Vinci said, "You should have 2 emotions when approaching a grotto, fear and desire. You should fear what may be inside, but desire to discover." To approach Painshill's grotto, we descend to water level, where the island is split in 2, joined by a stone arch, its underside laden with crystal stalactites. The entrance is hidden within the rocks. Once inside, you are dazzled by many more stalactites, glistening in rays of sunlight to create a magical cave. Crystals themselves are natural minerals, including gypsum, calcite, fluorite, and quartz. Each of the hundreds of thousands of crystals painstakingly stuck onto a man-made wooden frame. Underfoot, you crunch through a flooring of sand and crushed seashells. Landscape designer Von Schell described Painshill's grotto as the finest of its type ever built, and it exerted considerable influence on later grottos in other gardens. For many people, the highlight of their trip to Painshill is to stand in the crystal grotto and marvel at this unique spectacle. In Hamilton's day, water was raised from the lake by Archimedean screw, held in a tank, then released as visitors approached, to flow into bays and internal pools, sparkling over rocks and corals. The water still flows into the pools, but nowadays we use an electric pump. We leave Grotto Island by the Woollett Bridge, another Palladian design, named after the 18th century engraver William Woollett, who often visited Painshill and published books of engravings of the park, which have proved very useful in recreating Hamilton's vision authentically. Here is his engraving of Woollett Bridge in 1760, which is now held in the British Museum, and a present-day view. No replica has been made of the pleasure boat shown here, but it is believed to have been a paddle boat, working a bit like a pedalo. There is a reconstructed boathouse at the eastern end of the lake. As we approach the curve of the lake, we see two very tall taxodiums, or swamp cypresses, by the water's edge. These are stunning in autumn, turning red and casting their reflections in the water. Originally from the Everglades in Florida, they thrive by the lake, and these particular specimens are over 250 years old. The planting changes from this point. Hamilton planted dark yews along the path to induce an air of melancholy, as the next venue is the Mausoleum, designed to cause visitors to pause and reflect on the transience of life. It was based on a Roman triumphal arch, partly ruined, with altars and sarcophagi. He filled the niches in the walls with urns and antiquities collected on his grand tours. The painting on the right is from 1773 and shows the arch still intact. Walking through the arch, the visitor's mood would brighten with the view of the sunlit riverbank and Waterwheel. In 1773, Wedgwood and Bentley, who produced fine china and porcelain tableware, created the Imperial Russian service for Catherine the Great, and they chose the Mausoleum and 6 other scenes from Painshill to feature among their designs for the 932-piece set. This 14-acre lake was created by Hamilton, raising water 15 feet from the river mole by timber waterwheel to flow through the lake, then return to the river. Initially, the lake was smaller. Then, as I mentioned, he extended it by flooding the clay meadow. The S shape, or Rococo double curve, was a popular shape for lakes, both aesthetically pleasing and hiding both ends of the lake to give the impression of a much bigger lake. Beneath its serene surface, the lake is brimming with life. The native English water lily grows here, and you can spot water boatmen, damsel, and dragonflies. Beneath the water swim carp, bream, roach, rudd, tench, perch, and pike. You will often see an angler or two with their seats and shelters set up to enjoy a day by the lakeside. They're from Walton Angling Society, and they keep a watchful eye on this part of Painshill when the rangers are off duty. On the water and nesting on the islands, we have swans, coots, Egyptian greylag and Canadian geese, and ducks, as well as the heron standing guard. Beyond the 5-arch bridge, at the end of the lake, lies the rustic cascade, where water fed from the waterwheel trickles over moss-covered rocks into the lake. Although small and often overlooked by 21st century visitors, this feature was considered in the 18th century to be in extremely good taste, as it looks so natural. From here on, the scenery changes. Remember the 2 landscape artists I mentioned at the beginning? From the serenity of the lake, we now enter wild woods and narrow paths leading us to the Waterwheel. At 10.6 metres diameter, it's one of the largest working water wheels in the UK, driven by 48 paddles. Hamilton's original water wheel would have been too big to be very efficient at drawing up water to fill the lake, but he also wanted it to be a visible and impressive feature in his landscape garden. This cast iron water wheel, the same size as Hamilton's, was installed by a subsequent owner of Painshill in the 1830s. Inside the pump house, you can observe the machinery in action. The water is carried through a 200-metre brick duct hidden in the hillside to emerge at the cascade. The Alpine Valley was much praised by 18th century visitors. It was described in Horace Walpole's book Essay on Modern Gardening as an alpine scene composed almost entirely of pines and firs, a few beech, and such trees as assimilate with a savage and mountainous country. Mr. Charles Hamilton at Painshill, in my opinion, has given a perfect example of this mode. All is great and foreign and rude. Hamilton planted a great variety of pines and firs here, creating a dark and sombre effect. Visiting in 1763, John Parnell was perfectly enchanted by the beauty of this vale. When the son of the Swedish botanist Linnaeus visited in 1781, he declared, "A greater variety of fir to be found in this spot than in any other part of the world which I have ever seen." Hidden within these woods is a rustic thatched hut perched on twisted tree stumps, the Hermitage. These were a popular feature in 18th century gardens, intended to signify a contemplative retreat from the world. To add atmosphere, Hamilton hired a man to act as a hermit for 7 years, after which he'd be paid 700 guineas. Meanwhile, he was to remain in the grounds, silent, wear a camel skin robe, and never cut his hair, beard, or nails. He would be fed and watered and be given a Bible, optical glasses, an hourglass, a hassock for a pillow, and a mat. But he only lasted 3 weeks before being found drunk at a local pub and sacked. When the Hermitage was reconstructed after being made derelict and chopped up for firewood, the landscape team used timber from the park to make it, and a modern-day hermit, an artist, lived a simple life there for 2 weeks. He remained silent, drawing, reading, listening to music, and communicating with visitors by written notes. The Gothic Tower stands at the highest point of the park. Made of brick, it was originally rendered to look like a medieval stone watchtower and used to house the marble statues that Hamilton brought back from his travels. He called it his castle. It stands at 27 metres, and although it's currently closed, in normal times you can climb the 99 steps to the castellated parapet. In the 18th century, visitors could see St. Paul's Cathedral and Windsor Castle, as well as Box Hill, Guildford, and Claremont. Now, on a clear day, you can see Windsor Castle, but Canary Wharf is the new London landmark. Hamilton was interested in science as well as art, and he contacted Benjamin Franklin for details of the lightning conductor he had designed. And he installed one to the Gothic Tower several years before St. Paul's Cathedral got one. Vandals burnt the tower down in 1973, but it was restored and reopened by the Duchess of York in 1989. Painshill Park staff lived there for several years until they started a family and found the spiral staircase a bit challenging. Climbing back up from the Alpine Valley, our spirits are lifted as we reach the Elysian Plains. In Greek mythology, Elysium is a beautiful meadow, a paradise where heroes deemed worthy by the gods were granted immortality and lived a life of perfect happiness. It was replanted in 1992 with 3,000 shrubs and trees, including some exotics available to Hamilton. The trees here are mostly deciduous, and there are colourful flowering shrubs, as well as wild meadows. In 1772, John Wilkes said, "I sauntered through the Elysium of Mr. Hamilton's garden until 8 in the evening, like the first solitary man through paradise." Bacchus, the god of wine, is a fitting choice for Painshill Park with its productive vineyard. Hamilton bought the 7-foot-high statue while in Rome in 1727. He claimed he'd paid £2,000 for it, and that's about £2 million today. He judged it the best this side of the Alps and said he would not part with it for its weight in gold. It was highly regarded by 18th century visitors, but much later we discovered its secrets. When Hamilton sold the park, the statue changed hands several times, disappearing for many years before, about 13 years ago, being rediscovered by one of our volunteers at Anglesey Abbey, a National Trust property in Cambridgeshire. An archaeologist studied it and made some interesting discoveries. The head, feet, vine trunk, and parts of the panther are indeed ancient, but the torso and much of the legs date from the 18th century. The head actually came from the statue of a Roman goddess, so it could perhaps be described as a transgender statue. 4 copies were made, one for each of his homes, including Painshill, where he stands near the entrance and visitor centre. His original home was inside the Temple of Bacchus, a magnificent structure with Doric columns all around. It was made of laths and plaster, painted to look like stone, and to save money, the columns were made out of wood and the frieze from papier-mâché. It is possible that Robert Adam designed the building, which has similarities with his Roman Doric Admiralty screen in Whitehall. Certainly, he made 3 designs for the ceiling, incorporating vines and eagles, because Bacchus's father Zeus was sometimes depicted as an eagle. The niches either side of the door held plaster statues of Apollo Belvedere, Mercury, Venus de Medici, and Venus Marina. It was much admired, including by future 3rd President Thomas Jefferson, who described it succinctly as a Doric temple. Beautiful. Inside were 12 pedestals, displaying busts of Roman emperors that Hamilton brought back from Italy. All that remained of the temple in 1981 was its foundations, and it's the latest building to be reconstructed, finishing in 2019. As yet, the Trust has been unable to finish the interior or replace the statues or busts. However, the entrance is topped by this magnificent frieze showing a Bacchanalian parade and a border of alternating roses and the Hamilton crest. The final stop on the circular garden tour was the Turkish tent, where sheltered seats allowed visitors to look back over the park and contemplate the journey they had experienced. Canvas tents of this type were pitched during campaigns by the Ottoman army and left behind as they retreated from Vienna in 1683. Intrigued by this account, Hamilton recreated his own Turkish tent at Painshill. The original was built in 1759 in brick with a canvas surround and papier-mâché cornice. All that remained in 1981 was the floor. It was rebuilt in brick, but with fiberglass replacing the papier-mâché. Originally, the skirt was recreated in canvas, but it quickly deteriorated and has since been replaced by fiberglass. The Turkish crescent on top is carved out of lime wood and finished in gold leaf. It is well worth a look inside at the construction of the timber roof, so intricate that a specialist shipwright had to be employed to reconstruct it. Unusually, the funding for reconstructing this feature came not from a heritage fund, but from the generosity of a Jewish New Yorker, Jeffrey Steiner. To celebrate the 500th anniversary of 1492, when Jews were expelled from Spain, but given sanctuary by the Ottoman Empire. From the Turkish tent, there is a magnificent view. Here it is again, looking a little different in the snow and in the height of summer, illustrating the fact that you need to visit Painshill in every season and you'll always see something new. Next, we take a meandering path down the hillside to the 5-arch bridge. Originally built of wood, finished in lathe and plaster to look like stone. The reconstruction in 2011 used Portland stone and concrete, materials strong enough to take the weight of a fire engine if necessary. This and other scenes from Painshill may look familiar if you've watched the popular historical drama Bridgerton, which was partly filmed at Painshill. Now we have a choice of routes back. We could go across the bridge and alongside the lake, with a lovely view across to the Vineyard and ruined Abbey. But we're going to stay on this side of the lake and take the accessible path, through open grassland with a view of the grotto and the Gothic temple. A later feature along this route is the ice house, tucked away into the hillside, which was used to store ice from the lake in winter to act as a fridge for subsequent owners of Painshill from 1830 till 1930. It kept food and drink cool from the winter until August each year. Also along this path lies the Great Cedar. Standing taller than 9 double-decker buses, this tree dates from 1750 and was one of the exotic trees Hamilton introduced. The cedar of Lebanon is native to the mountains of the Mediterranean region in Lebanon, western Syria, and south-central Turkey. Beneath the tree is a fenced-off pool, all that remains of a Roman bath built by the next owner after Hamilton in the 1780s. It was a circular building of brick and plaster with a domed thatched roof and was fed with unheated water from a spring in the hillside. Nearby, a red oak stands out on the top of the slope, turning a stunning red in autumn. It's another original Hamilton tree. Our final stop is the walled garden by the entrance bridge. This acts as a kitchen garden for the cafe, as well as having information boards telling more about Hamilton's collection of exotic plants. Many of the plants around the park were sourced from a Quaker farmer botanist, and renowned seed collector John Bartram. He was based in Philadelphia and would ship 100 assorted seeds in a box for 5 guineas. Hamilton didn't know what he would be getting, whether they would survive the journey, or if they would thrive once here. But he received at least 2 such boxes from them, grew magnolias, tulip trees, kalmias, liquid ambers, and maple trees. Hamilton also corresponded and exchanged seeds with other plant enthusiasts, including Abbe Nolan, the plant advisor to Louis XV and XVI. Through the expansion of French colonies, Nolan had access to Africa, Spain, Portugal, and China. Hamilton may have sourced rhododendrons and azaleas through Nolan and his other European connections. Nolan finally visited Painshill, but was disappointed to miss Hamilton, who had already moved to Bath. In 1831, these walled gardens were described as some of the most productive in Surrey, with extensive ranges of hothouses, grapery, and peach houses. But 18th century vegetables would have looked a little different from today's. As the walled garden is used as a kitchen garden for Painshill Cafe, the current produce has to be recognisable and palatable to modern tastes. The blackboard here shows the harvest on a typical summer's day, with beans and peas, courgettes, salad vegetables, parsnips, carrots, beetroot, potatoes, spinach, herbs, and apricots. The walled garden is still used as a nursery for young trees, and fruit trees have been planted on the inside and outside walls to recreate Hamilton's orchard. Plums and apples grown in the walled garden are combined with other botanicals from around the estate to form the basis of Painshill gin. Also available from the shop is sparkling wine produced from Painshill's grapes and honey from the beehives located in the park. So, what happened to Painshill after Hamilton? The next owner was Benjamin Bond Hopkins, who replaced the house with a mansion, but spent little time here as he bought Wimbledon House, where he laid out a new park, complete with lake, grotto, and cascade. After he died, there were a number of subsequent owners, including the Coombs, who turned the Vineyard into a rockery and removed the columns from the temple of Bacchus to grace the portico of Painshill House. Throughout this period, the park continued to inspire visitors. Critic and poet Matthew Arnold enjoyed skating on the lake in the harsh winters of the 1880s and mentioned the cedars of Painshill in a poem. Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, and the King of Saxony made visits to Painshill from nearby Claremont. In her journal, the Queen described Painshill as quite beautiful. The park even got a mention in H.G. Wells' science fiction novel, War of the Worlds, published in 1898. In 1939, the park was requisitioned for the Canadian Army, and it was neglected and allowed to decay during the war years. It was subsequently sold off for farmland and forestry, and the house converted into private apartments, which were sold off separately and now fall outside the estate. Over the years, the buildings collapsed and wilderness took over. During the 1960s and 70s, the newly formed Gardens Trust combined with local residents in the Friends of Painshill to publicise the significance of the site. In 1980, Elmbridge Borough Council bought 158 acres of the original 250-acre site. Painshill Park Trust was formed to research and restore Painshill as closely as possible to Hamilton's original vision. Archaeologists and archivists have played an important role in restoring the park, as well as craftsmen and volunteers. It is now a Grade 1 listed landscape and of great international importance. In 1998, it received the Europa Nostra Award for exemplary restoration from a state of extreme neglect of a most important 18th century landscape park and its extraordinary buildings. And Painshill depends every day on its small but dedicated army of volunteers. In 2019, we won an award for volunteer-led Visitor Experience of the Year against stiff competition from National Trust properties nationwide, as well as London museums. I'm shown here collecting that award. To the left is my son Jack, who completed his Duke of Edinburgh Gold Award by volunteering alongside me in the Tower Cafe for a year. My daughter Claire is on the right. Here, just taking a winter walk in Painshill with our dog. Yes, we do allow well-behaved dogs on short leads. Now she works in the visitor centre, where Jack also works at weekends. Do say hello if you visit the park. So now you've seen the park and heard its story, I hope you'll agree with Thomas Whately's summary in his 1770 book, Observations of Modern Gardening. He said, "But Painshill is all a new creation, and a boldness of design and a happiness of execution attend the wonderful efforts which art has made there to rival nature." Thank you for your attention, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I'm sure we all very much enjoyed that, and I'll open the floor up to any questions.
Very enjoyable.
I know there's lots of comments in the chat during the talk.
It looks like you've got hands up, Angie, from Suzanne and from Anne as well.
Okay, Suzanne, would you like to?
Claire.
And Claire and Anne, please.
The water wheel that you've got, I presume it's an undershot. Am I correct?
Yes, I used to love water wheels. When I was young, I made Lego models of undershot and overshot. I don't think this is one, but in that it doesn't transport the water.
No, it does. It's weird.
It just turns the machinery inside, and there's like a nodding donkey thing inside the wheelhouse, and then that powers 3 pistons, so they go up and down, and they are the ones that actually pump the water. So that's how it was created. So the paddles just push the water around, and that turns the machinery in the.
But it doesn't actually do much.
Well,
Oh, it does. Yes, it powers the machinery, and the machinery powers the pumps, and the pumps pump the water.
And just as an aside, there were 200 Cedar of Lebanon's. Mine sadly lost its life during a storm, which split it in half, and I couldn't save it. So, and mine was about 200 years old. So I can imagine that you've got one of the very few that are remaining.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anna?
So it was Anne that had her
Anne,
hand up.
sorry, beg your pardon.
Yeah.
she's gone.
Looks like she's frozen. Should we go to Claire?
Yeah, let's go to Claire.
Hello there. Thank you so much, Misha, for that lovely presentation. You obviously, with disabled people here, we all want to know about access. Do you have
Yeah.
a map, first of all? Do you allow electric scooters? Do you hire out electric scooters? And secondly, can I ask you about that beautiful grotto? It doesn't look very accessible.
Right. Okay. So yes, we welcome people with mobility difficulties. So we have a range of options. We don't have any mobility scooters to hire. We're a very small charity, and everything's a very small scale and nothing like Wisley Gardens or anywhere like that. But we have folding wheelchairs to hire. To borrow for free. We also have a buggy, like a golf cart, and it has room for 4 people to sit in it. And I and some of the other guides are able to give a guided tour in that buggy and take you to all the places as near as possible, so you can see them even if you can't sort of walk right up to them. All around the park, and we can get around most of the park in the buggy and show you around. So that's another possibility. We've got an accessible route for wheelchairs, which is around the lake, and because the head gardener has opened up the views, although that only goes around the lake to the 5 Arch Bridge, so that's only the first half of the garden, you can actually see some of the other features at the top of the hills and things beyond that. So you do get to see them even if you can't approach them very closely. And that is that's a almost level path, not much by way of hills in it, and it's well tarmacked. So that's accessible. Yes, we allow people to bring their mobility scooters in.
Grotto?
Oh, and the grotto, yes. So the grotto has another entrance at the back. So the big sort of dome-like cave bit that I showed, you can get to that. You can get a mobility scooter in there. I've seen people do that, or a wheelchair. So long as it's not too wide, it'll go into that entrance, which is normally people's exit. So people on foot would enter from the other end, and they go round corners down a very narrow corridor before they opened out into that big dome. But you get to go round the back and just into the dome, and you can see that's the best part of it.
Can I extend my thanks as well? I've not been to Painshill Park, so it was really useful.
I have now.
I really enjoyed it.